Thank you, Tim. Yeah. And do you want, let's make it darker.
Okay.
So I have a quick question. I know some of you quite well, and I recognize lots of you, but is everyone in here getting a degree in architecture, or are there others who are not in architecture? Silence is good, but I don't know the answer. Tim, do you?
I think most of them are, we have second, third, and fourth year MPAA students.
Okay.
But I don't think, last year we had a couple, I don't think we have very many this year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how many of you have heard me lecture or talk before? A lot of you. So some of this may be repetitive, and some of this will be new. Are you in Efthymios' class now as well or something? Okay, well, I'm just going to roll through this, and some of the stuff that I suspect you've already seen, I'll go through a little bit quicker. I'm going to share something with you that's kind of personal, but in 2009, I was hired full-time at the University of New Mexico, and I got my dream job. And then in 2010, I was diagnosed with cancer, and I went through 6 surgeries and continued to teach. And weirdly enough, that year was one of the best years of my life, because suddenly everything became crystal clear. You spend your time the way that you want to spend your time. You can say no to things. Like saying no for me is really hard. I take on way too much. But if you say, no, I can't do that, I have cancer, no one argues with you. But the point is that I don't want any of you to get cancer, because it really actually does kind of suck. But I would like you to think about what you're passionate about and make that your life. So that if you're not interested in something, or you're living a life that doesn't bring you joy and interest, to figure out how to do that. And that's the way that I operate. So this quote here, "The real voyage of discovery consists in not seeing new landscapes, but in having new eyes," is kind of really another way of saying it. It's like I woke up during that time. And I try to see a theme in my work is taking the idea of the mundane landscape and transforming it into something that I see as beautiful. So the first project that I want to talk about is, over winter break, I did a competition, fairy tales competition. It's an architecture competition that happens every year, and they get thousands and thousands of entries for this. And the jury is massive and world-renowned, and it's essentially you have 5 images and 1,500 words to describe a different type of reality. And most of the images that I saw were kind of science fiction based, and I decided I didn't want to go with science fiction based, although maybe there's a component of that in. But essentially I wrote a story about friendship and the power of friendship to transform our environments. And these 2 women would go out and do day trips and imagine aging infrastructure for new purposes. So this one, for example, is a tower, transformer tower, and turning it into a platform for watching migratory birds. And these are hand-drawn. The infrastructure is hand-drawn, and then some of them I did photo montages as part of that. Like, so the water tower has a photograph in the background, and these are photographs that I have taken between Albuquerque and Santa Fe on my drives up north. But imagining an old water tower turned into an oasis and a place like a summer respite. The pump jack for oil, that one was sort of inspired by Donald Judd. Like, I imagine the circle moving back and forth across the landscape to see it, a place to occupy. The women in the images are me and my friend Mira, who many of you I'm sure know from our adventures that we've had, and the story was really inspired by this. The next one was a cell phone tower that was turned into nests and essentially a very large bird feeder, so that you could hear the tweets and songs of birds instead of the moronic tweets of our president. That was the idea behind that. And then the last one was kind of the idea of returning back to the city and taking the space in between 2 billboards and creating a kind of a beacon of hope. So this was done for a competition. The originals were, I think, 14 by 17. And then I met with Julia from the Harwood, and she saw this. I sent this out to my friends to honor our friendship, and she said, I want this in the Harwood Gallery. So there's Mira and I hanging them. We blew them up really, really tall. A good sign in Albuquerque, fantastic local business and printer, and they're printed on vinyl. And Mira, who has a degree, just got a degree in electronic arts, wanted to do a sound installation and a light installation. So we turned the entire room pink, covered the windows in pink paper. She put up lights that made the environment sort of pink. These photographs are by architecture student Chris Melton. And on opening night, thousands of people came. It was a show called Encompass. It's still up if any of you want to go see it. And the sound piece as part of it is me reading the story, and then Mira laid in sounds of birdsong and airplanes and that type of thing. It'll be up through the rest of the month. The next project that I want to talk about, and all of these have kind of landscape architecture and architecture embedded in them, but they're really just sort of the overall umbrella of design. I see and find design in just about everything that I do. And this project is called WRAP, and essentially my colleague, dear colleague Sue Fry, who I teach with, and I proposed an exhibition for a conference called WRAP, and it was taking iconic landscape plans. This one here is Versailles, if some of you can recognize it, taking iconic landscape plans and transforming them into clothing. And it was a really interesting way to do a precedent study, because you look at the plan in an entirely different way. You understand regulating lines, axis, the geometry, the sequence. And so from doing the study, we ended up learning so much more about the plans that we've been talking about and teaching about experientially through our classes. So these are some of the studies that we did of the dresses. We have Katherine Gustafson there, and Dieter Kienast and Lenotre. This is actually in the gallery, and we made these tags that hung from them like dresses that had the time frame. So it was like a timeline of these dresses, and the designer and the date. And there they all are together in this alcove in the gallery. And they were small, you know, the final ones were quite small. We didn't have the ability to move them and the money to make them incredibly large, but we thought at some time maybe we would actually make actual clothing out of these and prints from these designs. And we won a prize for this. I can't remember what it was, some sort of honorary thing. Another project, and I'm just going to zoom through some of these, was a call for, it was at Richard Levy Gallery in downtown Albuquerque, and it was a call for a birdhouse, a conceptual birdhouse, some of them were real, to raise money for the Audubon Society. And so it was put out on the web and social media that these got auctioned off, and there was a big night of auctioning locally as well, but you could bid online. And this one I made in response to a Nico Case song called Maybe Sparrow. I don't know if any of you know it or not, but it's a beautiful song. And it's about, like, you know, she's saying, essentially telling the sparrow to be careful that the hawk is out. And so this is transforming a song, the sparrow being a young woman, the hawk being perhaps a predator, but creating this safe space. And the materiality of this was acrylic, sanded to create the shape of a home, but then this other form, and twigs from the bosque. These are cottonwoods that I painted and constructed a little person to put on it. And I think in the end, I don't remember how much it sold for, but I have the little prototype at home, which I keep. And then looking down, so I investigated photography with the iPhone. There's so much criticism about the iPhone being this mediator between us and our natural or our physical environments, that we're always operating and moving in a state of distraction. And I was curious about that because I agreed with it. I agree with that idea. But I thought, how can you use the iPhone to actually pay attention to your urban environment and to gain a sense of landscape literacy? So I started doing these urban walks and taking photographs of the ground plane as I was walking. And this project turned into, I roped in my friend and colleague Phoebe Lickwar, who's in Arkansas, turned into an exhibition that was called Looking Down, Looking Up. It turned into a journal article about how to interface technology with landscape literacy. And then we made a short film about it and invited people from all over the country to submit their images of looking down on a walk. And how many miles were walked. And I'll show you that short film. It's about 5 minutes or so. So this was from the gallery exhibition. And it was here. I don't know if any of you remember that. It was here, and it was also sent to Arkansas. I'm not sure about the quality of this. We'll see how it is.
Past designers who used photography to hold time at particular moments, to investigate the transitory nature of the world around us, to observe and build, image by image, our understanding of the greater whole of which we ourselves are a part. In a technological world defined by speed, walking becomes an act of defiance, a commitment to be present and aware of our physical and cultural environments through slow movement and critical observation. With each moment of pause, a world of materiality, composition, color, microclimates, and habitat unfold, bringing with it accumulated knowledge about the complex built and natural systems in which we live. Our cities, like trees, have roots in the form of pipes, anchoring them to the ground, supplying them with energy. This root infrastructure is invisible to us until malfunction prompts excavation, revealing a small moment in the vast systems that supply us with water, electricity, and gas. The graphic spray paint markings from the city utility workers on sidewalks, streets, front yards, and alleyways also remind us of the energy beneath the surface. A child saw a flip-flop, a footprint in the concrete, a discarded note, baked skid marks, and declarations of love all give intimacy to the heart and often remind the surfaces of our cities. Tree-toed footprints on packed mud, an iridescent wing, and a stray feather that remind us of other remaining inhabitants of our cities. Defiant plants bring life to the most unlikely and inhospitable cracks in our city services. Russian elm seedlings, Bermuda grass, glowmelon, poppies. Every city has its natives and invasives. These plants have a complex and cultural story to tell about our past, how they migrated, our relationship to nature, and our future. Ubiquitous or novel, natural or constructed, surface materials and construction methods indicate time and our changing knowledge of tools and technology.
Looking down, rediscovering urban ground represents 25 participants, 15 cities, over 50 miles walked, and over 1,000 photographs.
So, well, there you go. A film made out of all of these thousands of photographs in lots of different cities. It was a really great and fun collaboration. My question is how you store all this stuff you create. Like archiving and storage becomes a really big issue. This was up in the gallery last fall. Some of you may have seen it. And again, it was using photography as a way to understand our worlds around us. I went on sabbatical for 2 months in Australia. That's one of the perks of being a professor, and really tried to think about how you can understand a place as a foreigner, even though most of my family actually lives in Australia, through this method of photography and represent the various narratives that are being seen throughout it. So I did a series of images. Each one was 12 inches by 44 inches long. And I wrote every single day that I was there, and I did a drawing every single day. So I had 60 pages of writing and 60 drawings, actually a bit more than 60 drawings. But I'll give you an example of a piece of writing. And I called this show Imaging Anamnesis. And this little passage is from a friend of mine, actually, Willa Grace, who wrote a paper on anamnesis. Anamnesis encourages us to reimagine a truth that is amiable and responsive to all amendments and modifications, a truth that has not been decided definitively, but that instead invites inquiry and adjusts itself to reflect new discoveries. In the same way, when I speak of remembering, I am speaking of poetic or reconstructive remembering and a creative revealing. So through the process of montage, it's revealing sort of my truth and a different way of understanding what exists. So these are the images created from that process, and some of the writing from my journal. After 36 hours of travel, I have finally arrived. I think it was Isabel Allende that said jet lag is the time it takes for the soul to catch up to the body in travel. I feel fractured and whole, 2 places at once. The familiar and the foreign occupy the same place as I take in the color of the earth, the blueness of the sky, Zita's smile, the beautiful barks of the gum trees, and the surprise and magic of water. In a time zone 16 hours ahead of New Mexico, I am in the future, yet here's my past. Body, mind, and spirit calibration. Take your time. Isn't that mine amazing, Tim? It was like 2 blocks from her house. It's incredible. What's that?
Where in Australia?
So I went to Western Australia, and my aunt lives there, and then back to Eastern Australia, where the rest of my family lives. So Western Australia is very, very remote. It was south of Perth, in between the Indian Ocean and the Southern Ocean. Have you been there?
No, I haven't. Never lived in Perth.
It's pretty magical. Okay. So I'll read another one. Irene called to us across the parking lot of the North Cliff Understory Sculpture Park. "Yous want to meet some Joeys?" Of course we said yes, and hung out by her van holding the baby kangaroos in pillowcases for over an hour. They smell like puppies, and their fur is soft and woolly. Strange, unrehearsed voices emerged from me and Zita as we cooed, played, fed, and pet. Irene has rescued over 250 Joeys from moms that have been hit by cars, with the baby surviving in the pouch. Her property backs up to the southern forests, so she just releases them when they are ready and watches them grow and join the wild elders. I can't help but wonder if the joeys are later hit by cars and their young rescued by Irene. Irene seems part kangaroo, part woman, 100% amazing. We are grateful and so moved by the experience. Then wander through the bush, discovering art placed in and inspired by nature, the best pairing. This was pretty amazing. I watched a, do you mind being read to? Like kids? Story time? Okay. On May 15th, 1911, Captain Tonneson and 12 crew members sailing from Norway survived the Mandalay shipwreck on the shores of Walpole Region in Western Australia. I look at their faces closely, some of them so young, and try to imagine how they felt. Their feet firmly on the ground after months at sea, the fatigue in their bones, the thirst and hunger, and the rugged, uninhabited landscape as far as the eye can see. Zita makes her way down to the shore, Zita's my aunt, and positions herself directly across from the emerging remains of the Mandalay. She sits cross-legged, and I watch her, watching the waves dance against the Mandalay as the sun sets. I whisper into the wind, I'm sorry you can't be here, Mom, to see your country, your ocean, feel the sand beneath your feet, to taste the salty air, to hear the crash of the waves and the wind in the grass. Tonight we will set up camp under the peppermint trees and sleep to the sound of kookaburras. Even though you are 10,000 miles away, you are here with us. You are part of us, this land that you left over a century ago. So that's a really magical place too. If you ever get a chance to go to Australia, you should. It is extraordinary, and there are only about 10,000 things that will kill you in a heartbeat. So just be careful while you're there. Totally extraordinary place. And this is like that house in the center. This is up in Elands, which is a subtropical forest area. It was a logging town that sort of got inhabited by artists. They coexist simultaneously. And this house was an old tractor shed that got converted into a house and artist space. And I just wanted to move in. My friend Suey lives there. This is in Newcastle, where I gave a lecture in a prison cell. Not in a prison cell, in a former prison, and that was the exercise yard with a cage ceiling on the top, and the back is the urinal. It was very creepy. Sydney, graffiti in Melbourne, more Melbourne, and then my cousin Tim's place, which was very intense. So, and then in the image, the previous image, there were all these little things hanging from the ceiling and by fishing line. They're little viewfinders that you hold up and look inside, and my sketches were in there, and Karen King thought they were dental floss hanging from the ceiling, which I realized like not a lot of people looked in those. Did any of you look in the little things? Like 3 people in the whole audience. Yeah, I guess I need a big sign that says you can touch, you can look in these things. So the next project that I want to talk to you about, I'm bouncing across the globe, was a competition I did with Anne Gonzalez and Kathy Cambeck, 2 of my colleagues. I'm sure you know Anne. And we decided to do a competition in Paris that was calling for a place that, I think this image is out of line, there we go. That was calling for an installation in front of the Eiffel Tower that would prohibit people from using their cell phones. So it was an ideas competition, and I had taught a class in Paris the year before and was totally amazed by the chairs that are all over Paris. They're just loose chairs, you can rearrange them, sit in them how you like. There are no signs in Paris that say no loitering. There are no signs that say no skateboarding, no biking, no anything. You know, it's like public space is truly public, it's democratic space. Here, we wonder why people don't occupy our plazas and our cities and our campuses, and there are signs everywhere that give us clues on how to behave and what not to do. So, needless to say, I love Paris. I love Albuquerque too. But I started thinking about this competition and took the form of the chairs and extruded them up 16 feet tall and thought, with a locker at the bottom, and I thought you had to put your cell phone in and use both hands to climb up the chair. So that's where the idea came in. Met with Kathy and Anne, and through conversations, and the idea of swings too, through conversations with both of them, we formalized the design and gave it much more of a structure. So they weren't movable at all. They were set within a grid form, and that was really Anne's contribution, that it needed something large, a larger presence in the landscape. So this is what we came up with. And the design of the chairs and the ladders, became broader, and you could sit 2 people in the chairs. And I decided to photograph all the people, not all the people, many of the people I love, and put them in the image. And that's something I really like to do, is have, instead of the Photoshop people that you get online, because I go to a lot of reviews in other places, and you see the same people in like in Arkansas and in, New York, all over the place. And it's creepy. So I decided to use my own images of people. And so, for example, there's my mom down in the corner, there's our dog, there's Mira and David who used to teach here, there's Kathy and Anne on a swing. My husband is somewhere in there. He's actually a really large, oh yeah, he's standing there in shorts. And I hand drew all of the trees and the Eiffel Tower. And then in terms of representation, it's always something that I love. It's making things look beautiful to communicate an idea that you hope is as strong as it's meant to be. Anne did the chairs and the swings in Rhino, I'm assuming, and then I brought them in again and sort of drew over them and added the people. And so we won first place on this, and we were hoping that it would get built. It didn't get built, but half the things I don't do for money or to get built. I do it because it's how I want to spend my time. Although my husband keeps saying, Katya, when are you going to start paying to work harder? And apparently that's what I do all the time. I pay money to work harder. He'd like me to stop that. And then Foxes in the Garden, which many of you have seen, so I'll zip through this. This was a competition I did with Sue Fry and Marie Parker Simons, dear friend of mine in Santa Fe. And it's an international garden festival in the Loire Valley in France, and it happens every single year. There are 26 new gardens that get built. 6 of those gardens are invited guests, and they're by famous landscape architects, and artists. And then the other 20 are for a competition. So we submitted, they get over 300 submissions every single year, and here's the deal. It has to be able to look good right away from the time the garden opens, which is in the end of April. It's open for 6 months. They get 4,000 visitors a day during that 6 months. And on the grounds, the rest of the grounds, it's filled with amazing art installations and this incredible chateau that has contemporary art in it. It's truly spectacular. In fact, it might be my favorite place on the planet. And each year there's a theme, and this theme for this year was Gardens of Delirium, Gardens of Delight. And so, oh yeah, you have to build it for 11,000 euro, and you have to do that within 10 days. So we took the idea of Gardens of Delirium, Gardens of Delight, and Edward Gorey is one of my favorite dark children's adult authors, and my legal name is Kate, and that's K is for Kate who was struck with an axe. It's the alphabet and all the way all these children die. And we wanted to take the sort of aesthetic of Edward Gorey and the playfulness and the darkness as well together. And then later I found out about, I've forgotten her name, Sandy Skulkund and the work that she's done with foxes. So our idea really came from this idea of foxes in the garden. It was during Occupy Wall Street, and so we kept hearing the phrase foxes in the hen house. But foxes also have this international kind of global mystique as being creatures that can be shapeshifters. They're mischievous, they're playful, they're sneaky. And we also wanted to create kind of a fairy tale as well. So the path, the primary, this changed, and you'll see the final plan actually. The path, so I drew this, most of this is hand-drawn, and then I overlaid some elements in Photoshop. But you've got the path that we wanted to move through like a storyline, like a fairy tale. So you enter the garden and you don't see the full garden in front of you. And the elements of the garden, there are the foxes, there's a forest, there's a throne, there's water, there's a sort of secluded garden, and then the 2 green walls are filled with aromatic kind of vines. And so we wanted the inhabitant to really be able to make up their own story about this place, but for it to come off as being magical. So that's what the site looked like. It is that shape of a kind of a shield on the first day that we got there. That's the chateau in the background. And here's a short video of us building the design in 10 days. So I've said this before, and I'll say it again. You know, we're used to here working ridiculous hours, you know, all of us. I bet all of you in the audience are pretty tired right now, just from a life in architecture school and trying to manage things. And so I sort of suspected that we would get there and we would work 18 hours a day to get this done. But the French don't actually operate like that. Breakfast was at 9, and they closed the yard and the shop and everything at 5. So we basically had from 9:30 to 5 to work on this project. And then the lunch break was generally about 2 hours. We would go back to work, and they'd give you like a big old carafe of wine. And so the interesting thing is that it ended up being like a vacation, because we'd work hard during the day, and then at night we would go, you know, eat. Someone would feed us beautiful meals, and then we'd go for walks in the wood or walk down to the town. And so it ended up being this really like generative time that wasn't exhausting, and it made me think about the way that I was living my life, that we perhaps can get what we need to have done accomplished and still eat well and sleep well and be happy. And that kind of philosophy lasted for about 3 months when I got back, and then we get into our ritual of burning ourselves out. I'm notorious for that. I'm totally exhausted as I'm standing here right now because we just came back from a conference, and oh my gosh, it's nutty. But I urge all of you in your design process to think about that, to really think about, you know, are there things that we could do differently to improve the quality of our life and our design process? So I set up this little GoPro in the corner, and I think it took a photograph a minute or something like that. And I love seeing a time lapse, because you see things that you don't notice when you're there, like the shifting of the shadows. There's a balloon that crosses over that I didn't see when I was there, a hot air balloon. And I painstakingly went through every single photograph and took out pictures of butt cracks, because you know it's inevitable, right, when you're building things. And then I realized like I didn't have to do that, because it wasn't. It took me hours, and I was sort of like mentally scarred after that process. So this is what the garden looked like when we were done. And I'm just going to zip through these. I have a little video of it too. But it came out pretty well, you know. There were things I was pissed about, like we had height requirements for the wall, which meant the proportions to me were hard to look at. Yes. And then a lighting designer came in and did some things at night. And so this was like the day that it opened, so the plants hadn't really grown up. And I watched it, I sort of stalked it over online on the web to see how it matured and changed. I also, the French, when we were gone, they put in that understory in the forest in the garden because they thought it was too minimal. And yeah, I just wanted a dark forest floor, you know, and then there, around the throne there was a patch, they're called graffiti fern. They're really beautiful, like purple and green, like a carpet, like an actual carpet around the throne. And so the idea is that you could sit in the throne and look back through the window at the chateau, but then the hedge grew up and you couldn't see the chateau. But we tried. Things you learn. Anyway, you get the idea. And then I came home and thought that I really liked making the foxes. I did them on the CNC machine here. So I made a whole bunch more and decided that this is a median strip right next to my house, that I would go out and put foxes in the median strip because I was sick of looking at it and I wanted to claim my space in the city. Well, and what was great, we went out at night, Mira and Kenji and I, my friend Kenji, is that when the cars drove by, they would cast these shadows on the wall across that would move. It was really beautiful, like something we hadn't anticipated. But the foxes didn't last long. I think it was just over 24 hours. And when they disappeared, I'm pretty sure it was someone that was drunk coming home from the bars or something, because it was like at 2 in the morning, you know. Yeah. A couple of projects, competitions that I've done with my friend Carole. She used to work as an architect for Antoine Pridac, and she got laid off and started making jewelry out of leather. And it's interesting because this design really is like her designs for her jewelry. And now her jewelry, which is laser cut leather, is in just about every museum store across the country. And she's loaded, unlike an architect usually. But the hug hut, and I hope that some of these competitions I'm showing you, you keep your eye out for and do them yourself. This is for warming huts. It's a yearly competition in Canada. And it's hard to imagine like that type of freezing coldness, but it's essentially to create a stopping place for people who are ice skating. And there's a whole bunch of these installations. You can look online. They're super beautiful. So this one, the idea was made out of felt, cut felt. And then the one that I primarily worked on was called Outside In. And it was these two sort of boxes you can see from the section. One of them was winter and the other was spring, with hanging gardens and light coming in. But the idea mainly was to shelter you from the wind and the cold. Another competition I did with some colleagues who are in another state. We didn't win this. I think we submitted it like a minute before the deadline and decided to do it quite late. But it was for an abandoned bridge in Queens, which, similar to the idea of the High Line and, you know, what can be done. Actually, my students won this competition, so I did it over winter break. But conceptually, the idea was that the Queensway, the line, used to take people to Rockaway to swim in the ocean. And so I thought, well, I'll just bring the ocean. We'll just bring the ocean to the line there. And it was a lot of fun to work on. And finally, I'm going to just, this is my backyard. Doesn't it look like kind of New Mexico vernacular backyard? So my husband and I have a design build firm. We do primarily residential stuff, and we use our backyard as a way of testing materials and design ideas. And you know, I can't say that anything we do is particularly original, and I don't care. But it's, you can tell that the table isn't, for those of you that know Donald Judd, is inspired by Donald Judd. Our house is really small. That in the background is my studio, and behind that is his shop. But the house is really small. It's 900 square feet, and it was built in 1906, and it's in the historic neighborhood in Albuquerque. But it has a decent-sized backyard, so we pretty much live out there in the summertime. So the table is 14 feet long, and it's covered by wisteria and grapes, and then we have a vegetable garden on the left. And so we build everything. I say we, he does the majority of the building. I'm learning, I'm getting better at stuff. But you know, the deck, the steel frames, all of that. This on the left is, it's a clothesline covered in morning glories. Like, I wanted to be able to hide the clothesline from the backyard, and it's made of steel, and it grows up, and it's this incredibly beautiful green wall on one side, and then the clothes on the other side. The garden explodes in the summertime. We create this sort of refuge, and then this was after it rained one time. The image on the left is Jay does a lot of pruning of trees and cutting down trees, removing them, and we keep all of the wood and burn it in our fireplace. But he's made a series of these walls, essentially, these steel racks that we put all of the wood in. So we use it for privacy and also for our, you know, wood holder. And then, oh, you can't hear the sound on this one for some reason, but it's become this sort of oasis in downtown where we have millions of hummingbirds, finches, sparrows. I've seen birds I haven't seen in years, nuthatches, and we had skunks this summer, but I think a lot of people had skunks this summer. We had a great horned owl back there, and so it's like trying to create this, you know, urban and nature, trying to have them really come together in a singular design. I want to talk about West Bend West. That is a a warehouse that I had with some friends of mine for a while, but I was doing too much. So it was something had to go. Now, I want to talk to you all about this talent show. Yeah, I can see the looks on your faces. This is happening, and it's happening on the 13th of April. Friday the 13th, the deadline to sign up, and you sign up through me emailing me, is on the 1st. And so I am going to completely humiliate myself and show you a couple of things from the last talent show. The thing is, you don't have to have a talent. It can be an anti-talent show. It can be that you're so bad at something that it's hysterical. And I'm going to give you some ideas. Like some of the students, this was actually really good. Tim, did you go to the talent show last time? You were out of town. So a group of students got together and made fun of faculty. And it was brilliant. I mean, the impersonation of Roger and Moises was like unbelievable. And of Kramer, oh my goodness. I mean, the crowd was just in hysterics. We had a contortionist that night. We had musical events. And I'm going to just show you, if I'm online, I'm going to show you a clip that Mira and Kimma and Kristen and I did, and an architecture student then, Jake Tipman. First of all, I want you to know I can't sing, but I did. I made this whole, it's not really singing, it's sort of talking out of tune. We were called the Party Girls with the ass in the back, and Jake wore a donkey head and did the drum beat for this. And were any of you there? You probably weren't there for that talent show. But I just want to, okay, this is just a tiny little clip. And I'll walk you through my spaces. We're making fun of architecture. So it was like montage, collage, and interstitial spaces. Give me a second, I'll walk you through my places. it was like making kind of. This and my synthesis. I can't seem to find what I want on Pinterest. And this tweet. Okay. Anyway, you can see it's well attended, right? And then I have another one. So I did two acts. So I study Taekwondo too. That's Heather. She's badass. So, I don't know what that's about. Seriously, I have no idea. Okay. Yeah, so good. So it's 10 till 12. I was supposed to talk until 12. I didn't do it. I failed. Give me an F-. But let's talk for a minute. Think about the talent show. I really, really, really want to get emails from you. Because it is, like I said, my philosophy that you have got to find joy in life. You can't wait for it to be when the semester's over. You can't wait for it to be at a certain time because, as my mother always told me, you could be hit by a bus. And I grew up in a town with 2,000 people and thought, well, that's unlikely. There were no buses. Now that I live in Albuquerque, I think I could totally get hit by a bus. But the point is that think about what it is that you love to do and do that and do it well. And don't put off having fun until it's too late and just sign up for the talent show. That's all I have to say.
Awesome.
Any questions?
Let's give Katya a hand.
Thank you.
Do you guys have any questions, Katya? Don't be shy. I definitely do.
Why don't you start, Tim, and then maybe someone will think
Okay.
of something.
Well, I think, what comes to mind is that statement about enjoy what you love doing. And I think that sometimes it takes a while to really understand because, as students, you're sort of in the midst of getting through it,
Yeah.
But then ultimately you come to a place where you start to understand what you're passionate about. And I think, when did you really start to move in the direction that you're going now? When did you really, was this always something that, you didn't do it when
No.
you graduated in design, did you?
Yeah, no. So let's see. I got my undergraduate in Olympia, Washington in, gosh, it was a long time ago. I think I graduated in 1992. And I studied, the Evergreen State College was a liberal arts college, which was really fantastic. There were no grades, no exams. You had to, that's not why I went, but it was a bonus. You had to design your own curriculum, and so that was really about being self-empowered, like thinking about what you want to study. And I knew I was a terrible writer, so I did, the first year was The Closing of the American Mind, and we read sort of the canon for canon for America, and then looked at third world women authors of color and compared those two. And then there was, I studied film and feminist theory and sort of all of these things. And it was right when the Riot Girl movement was happening and Nirvana was like playing every week on the campus. And it was a really extraordinary time. But after that, I was like, what do I do? And I moved to San Francisco and I did social work. I worked with kids who were homeless and HIV positive and drug addicted. It was really bleak under the age of 17. I worked for an organization called Project Read, which was, and I kept doing photography during that time, but Project Read was adults who had English as a first language who had never learned to read and write. So it was essentially people who had spent the majority of their lives in prison. And to keep kind of, I was young, I was like 22 years old when I was doing that stuff. To keep from not feeling totally depressed, I would do art, like on the side. And so I didn't really have a formal training in that. Eventually traveled around the world, came back to New Mexico, and started doing small metal construction and did jewelry for a while. But it was kind of toxic and I could feel like I was getting sick from it. So I stopped and went back to school, got a degree in landscape architecture. And I have to say that my time during that as a student, I was crazy unhappy. Like it was very stressful. I put this ridiculous amount of stress on myself. I was sleep deprived. I was smoking like 2 packs of cigarettes a day. It was just like not a good experience. Even though the work I did, I look back on it and it's good. But and then I worked for Kramer, an architect, for 4 years, and then started teaching adjunct in architecture. And I realized like, hey, wait a minute, I don't want anyone else to have that same experience that I've had, but I really love teaching and the ideas. And so that's when I sort of started, when I became, got a full-time job here and I lied. I never smoked 2 packs of cigarettes a day. It was maybe half a pack, but it was too much. But I started thinking, for tenure, you have to publish constantly, and I hated writing. And I was like, I'm going to figure out how to do this. And for those of you that don't know what tenure is, it's like you're evaluated after 3 years and then after 6 years, and you have to have published a certain amount of articles, you have to have done a certain amount of service. Teaching is only considered 30% of our job. And so I thought, I'm going to try and do this doing something I love because life is too short. And that's where cancer really helps to figure it out, but I wouldn't wish that on any of you. So that sort of transition, it's like I started to see the world as this incredibly magical place and not to take it for granted. And that can be super hard when you're really, really stressed out. So I would recommend the first thing to go when we get stressed is probably exercise and eating well, and then sleep. And that's just like we're killing ourselves. You have to keep exercising, you have to keep eating well, and you have to keep sleeping. I also learned that You know, when I was working on my thesis, I would stay up for like 3 days in a row. That's really unhealthy. And something would take me like 6 hours to do, and then I realized if I'd slept a good night's sleep, it would probably take me an hour. Like, we lose perspective on that.
I think just kind of on that, I think it's really, as an undergrad, I was sleep deprived. I think in graduate school I figured out how to better manage my time.
Yeah, yeah.
But it takes a little effort, you know. And
Yeah.
And if you don't take time for yourself, it really reflects in your body
Yeah.
or somewhere.
Yeah.
So anyway, but I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Is there any other questions? How about some design questions? It was like the full spectrum of work. Making, contemplative. It's really a lot of stuff. None of talking.
I have just a comment.
Yes.
Like, I love your work. I always see you passing to
Yeah.
the studio, but I never talk to you. And like, especially like sharing your personal story. Like, for me, like sometimes I kind of lose what I'm doing, you know, like I lose like the sense of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And it was good to remind.
Yeah. Oh, good. Wonderful. Good. Thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else? Anthony, any questions?
You don't have to have a question,
No,
Anthony.
I had one that I wanted to ask you afterwards, but I could ask you right now. The gallery with the pink walls and everything, where's that at?
Yeah, it's at the Harwood Arts Center, which is on 7th and Mountain. It's that big brick building.
I know her.
And it's the big brick building, and it's the main gallery, so you walk in the doors and it's the second door on the right. And it comes down at the end of this week, and the hours are from 9 to 5. And you can get the full audio experience.
I would be good.
Yeah, I'm also taking my dad there tonight at 8 o'clock, meeting Mira after hours, if anyone wants to show up and have a after hours experience in the gallery.
I think one of the things that we try to do in this class is kind of expose them to, you know, people, you know, that you're influenced by. Like last week, I gave a lecture on, you know, the people that I was influenced, you know.
Yeah.
Who are your influences?
My influences. So they come from all over the place, but in terms of writing, I think Rebecca Solnit, she wrote a book. She's written several books. One of them is Wanderlust, The Art of, or A Field Guide to Getting Lost, Hope in the Dark, The Faraway Nearby. Like, I read constantly. So as a writer, she's definitely that person. As a filmmaker, I really love Wes Anderson films. And, you know, it's like films really, really impact me, I think, greatly. Although I really have a bad memory for directors, but that sort of imagery, I think, is very powerful. In landscape architecture, I'm blown away by the work of Katherine Gustafson. She's an amazing landscape architect. And the work that West 8 does, the firm out of the Netherlands, they're pretty incredible. They do architecture and landscape architecture, and I'm much more drawn to the firms that there's a blurring between those two. There's a French firm called Agence Terre, and I love their work as well. It's really, really beautiful. Snøhetta, totally amazing. Their work is just awesome. And let's see, in terms of artist, my favorite artist, I'm like totally in love with this person I've never met, but his name is Olaf Er Eliassen. Olaf Er Eliassen. I like traveled all the way to Copenhagen to see a show of his and all the way to Berlin to see a show of his. I'm almost creepy. But his work is spectacular, and it embraces, you know, you've probably seen images of these like massive scaffolding that was put on the Brooklyn Bridge with a waterfall falling over it. That was one of his work. But he does like installation art, he does films, he does everything, and yeah, just totally extraordinary. And then weirdos like Louise Bourgeois. Is she still alive? Do you all know who she is? She does those giant spiders, but she's just a powerhouse, like a total powerhouse. So she's really incredible as well. Yeah. Yeah, find your people, find your tribe, and then, you know, push each other. I think in school it's like naturally there, which is great. But keep looking outside the world. Okay, you guys. Thank you for listening.